Millions of people grew up believing Star Trek was simply a TV show about hope, exploration, and the future. But a few episodes crossed lines that shocked networks, governments, and even loyal fans. Some disappeared from television for years. Others were pulled because of race, violence, or ideas that powerful people did not want audiences to see. The strange part is that many of these stories still spark debate today, decades after they first aired. Were they truly too controversial, or were they simply ahead of their time? To understand why these episodes became television legends, we have to go back to where the controversy first began. Long before Star Trek became one of the most famous science fiction franchises in the world, it was something much more risky. When the original series first aired in 1966, television was expected to entertain, not challenge society. Most shows avoided difficult topics like racism, war, political fear, or human prejudice. But Star Trek chose a very different path. Its creator, Gene Roddenberry, imagined a future where people from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds work together as one crew. On the bridge of the USS Enterprise stood men and women of different races and nationalities at a time when the real world was still struggling with deep division. That vision alone made the series unusual. But Roddenberry did not stop there. Instead of talking directly about the problems of the 1960s, he hid them in side stories about distant planets, strange civilizations, and alien conflicts. Behind every adventure was a question about humanity. Viewers thought they were watching science fiction, but many episodes were actually about the world outside their own windows. This made Star Trek different from almost every other television show of its time. Some audiences admired its courage. Others believed it was pushing ideas that television should avoid. That disagreement followed the series from its very first season. Even network executives were sometimes nervous. Certain scripts were rewritten. Some scenes were carefully edited. Producers often worried that an episode might upset local television stations or international broadcasters. In several countries, broadcasters had their own rules about what could and could not appear on screen. But the writers kept taking chances. They believed science fiction was the perfect way to discuss subjects that people were often afraid to talk about directly. As the show's popularity grew, so did its reputation for controversy. One week, an episode questioned hatred between different groups of people. The next week, another explored fear, dictatorship, or blind obedience. Many viewers saw powerful lessons hidden beneath the action. Others saw dangerous ideas. And that difference in opinion would soon lead to one of the biggest controversies in television history. Before we continue, here's something to think about. If a TV show challenged the beliefs of your society, would you want it removed, or would you believe everyone should be free to watch it and decide for themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments. What made these stories even more remarkable was that most of them never claimed to have all the answers. Instead, they asked difficult questions and trusted viewers to think for themselves. That approach earned Star Trek loyal fans around the world, but also attracted criticism from people who believed some subjects should never appear on television. Then came a single episode that changed television history forever. It featured just one moment, only a few seconds on screen. Yet those few seconds sparked headlines, angry reactions, and decades of discussion. Some praised it as a brave step forward. Others wanted it removed from television completely. That unforgettable moment will become one of the most talked about scenes in entertainment history. And it all began with an episode called Plato's Stepchildren. By 1968, Star Trek had already built a reputation for telling bold stories. But no one expected one episode to become one of the most controversial moments in television history. The episode was called Plato's Stepchildren. On the surface, it was another science fiction adventure. Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and the crew arrive on a distant planet ruled by powerful beings who treat humans like toys. These rulers use their incredible mental powers to force people to do things against their will, turning pain and humiliation into entertainment. But hidden inside that story was a moment that would change television forever. The alien rulers forced Captain James T. Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura to move toward each other. They struggle to resist, but the invisible power is too strong. Then, in one unforgettable moment, Kirk and Uhura share a kiss. Today, that scene may not seem unusual. In 1968, it was anything but. At the time, Many American television stations were still afraid to show interracial romance on screen. Segregation had only recently begun to end in many parts of the United States, and racial tensions remained painfully high. Civil rights protests filled the streets. The nation was deeply divided. Showing a white man and a black woman kissing on national television was seen by some as crossing a line that many networks had carefully avoided. Behind the cameras, even the production team knew they were taking a huge risk. William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk, and Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura, later explained in interviews that they wanted the scene to remain exactly as written. According to those involved, there were discussions about filming an alternate version without the kiss. But Shatner intentionally spoiled the alternate takes with humorous facial expressions, making them unusable. In the end, the original version was broadcast. That decision became part of television history. The response was immediate. Many viewers praised the episode for showing equality during a difficult time in American history. Thousands of letters arrived supporting the show. Some fans said the scene gave them hope that society could become more accepting. But not everyone felt that way. Some local television stations reportedly received angry complaints. A few stations in parts of the United States were hesitant to air the episode, fearing backlash from viewers. International broadcasters also approached the episode with caution, depending on local cultural standards. Yet something surprising happened. Instead of hurting Star Trek, the controversy made the episode even more famous. People who had never watched the series suddenly wanted to know why everyone was talking about it. The world saw a simple kiss. But beneath that moment was a much larger message. It wasn't really about romance. It was about equality. It was about challenging prejudice. It was about imagining a future where a person's race no longer decided their place in society. That was the real reason the episode became unforgettable. Of course, the kiss wasn't the only controversial part. The episode also explored abuse of power and the loss of free will, showing how dangerous it can be when a small group controls everyone else. Those themes still feel relevant decades later. But while Plato's Stepchildren shocked audiences, another Star Trek episode created a very different kind of controversy. This time, it wasn't because of race, it was because of children. The story was so unsettling that some countries decided it should not be shown at all, believing it crossed boundaries that television should never cross. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind television history and the moments that changed entertainment forever, consider subscribing. The next chapter reveals why one Star Trek episode became so controversial that broadcasters in several places chose to keep it off the air for years. Few subjects in history are as sensitive as Nazi Germany. Even decades after World War II ended, many countries had strict laws and broadcasting standards about displaying Nazi symbols or portraying Adolf Hitler's regime. So when Star Trek aired an episode built around that dark chapter history, controversy was almost guaranteed. The episode was called Patterns of Force. It begins with the Enterprise searching for John Gill, a respected historian and former teacher of Captain Kirk. Gill had disappeared while studying a distant planet. Kirk expected to find a peaceful researcher. Instead, he discovered something almost unimaginable. The planet had been transformed into a society that looked frighteningly similar to Nazi Germany. Soldiers marched through the streets in military uniforms. Citizens lived under constant fear. Anyone who opposed the government faced brutal punishment. At first glance, it seemed impossible that such a society could exist so far from Earth. Then the shocking truth emerged. John Gill had introduced the Nazi system to the planet. He believed he could copy only its efficiency and organization while avoiding its cruelty. His plan was to create order, not oppression. But history repeated itself. Once absolute power was placed in the wrong hands, control quickly turned into violence. The system Gill believed he could manage became something far darker than he had imagined. It was a powerful lesson. Some ideas cannot be separated from their consequences. You cannot bar the appearance of tyranny and expect freedom to survive. That message made the episode one of the boldest political stories Star Trek had ever told. However, not everyone focused on its warning. Some broadcasters were more concerned about the visual imagery itself. The episode featured Nazi-style uniforms, flags, salutes, and propaganda throughout its story. even though the clear purpose was to condemn dictatorship, not celebrate it. Those images were enough to make some countries extremely cautious. For many years, Germany did not broadcast Patterns of Force because of post-war restrictions and sensitivities surrounding Nazi imagery on television. It was eventually shown after edits and changing broadcasting standards made its educational context clearer. Other regions also handled the episode carefully, depending on their own laws and policies. This is why the episode is often described as banned. The reality is more nuanced. Its restrictions reflected historical trauma and legal concerns rather than support for censorship itself. Countries that had lived through the horrors of World War II approached these images with understandable caution. Yet over time, many critics came to appreciate what the episode was actually trying to say. It wasn't praising dictators. It was exposing them. It showed how intelligent people can convince themselves that they can control dangerous ideas, only to discover that those ideas eventually control them instead. That warning remains relevant today. History has shown again and again that freedom can disappear slowly, one decision at a time, especially when people stop questioning those in power. As this story reached its conclusion, Star Trek had accomplished something remarkable. A science fiction television series had encouraged millions of viewers to think about racism, scientific responsibility, and the dangers of authoritarianism, not through lectures, but through unforgettable stories. And yet, one final question remained. Why are these episodes still discussed nearly 60 years later? The answer has less to do with television, and far more to do with human nature itself. Most television shows entertain people for a few months. A few stay popular for years. But only a handful continue to spark conversations nearly 60 years after they first aired. That is exactly what happened with these Star Trek episodes. The reason is surprisingly simple. They were never really about space. They were about us. Every controversial episode reflected a real human problem. Plato's Stepchildren challenged racial prejudice at a time when many people were afraid to do so publicly. Miri warned about the dangers of scientific ambition without responsibility. Patterns of Force reminded the world that history must never be forgotten because ignoring its lessons can have terrible consequences. Those stories still matter because those problems have not completely disappeared. The world has changed in many ways, but prejudice still exists. Technology continues to advance faster than society can always keep up, and history continues to remind us that freedom should never be taken for granted. That is why these episodes continue to find new audiences. Many younger viewers watch them today expecting old-fashioned science fiction. Instead, they discover stories that still feel surprisingly modern. The special effects may look different from today's productions. The costumes may seem dated, but the ideas remain powerful. That is the true legacy of Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry and his writers believed science fiction could do more than imagine the future. It could help people better understand the present. By placing difficult conversations on distant planets, they encourage viewers to think differently about life on Earth. Perhaps that is why some episodes face restrictions or temporary bans in certain places. Not because they encourage hatred, but because they force people to confront uncomfortable questions. Over time, many of those restrictions disappeared as societies changed and broadcasters reconsidered earlier decisions. What once seemed too controversial eventually became recognized as an important part of television history. Looking back today, these episodes represent more than entertainment. They represent courage. The courage to tell stories that challenge powerful ideas. The courage to ask difficult questions. And the courage to believe that audiences were smart enough to think for themselves. Everyone experiences moments when speaking the truth feels risky. History often remembers those who were willing to ask hard questions, even when the answers made people uncomfortable. That is one reason these Star Trek stories continue to inspire new generations of viewers. In the end, the biggest mystery was never why these episodes were restricted. The real mystery is why their messages still feel so relevant today. Because every generation faces the same choice, to repeat the mistakes of the past, or to learn from them. But this is not the only television story that challenged the world around it. In our next documentary, we'll uncover another legendary series that pushed boundaries so far that it changed the entertainment industry forever, and left behind secrets that many viewers still don't know.